Hey, it's Sarah from Roadworthy. Welcome back. So, as promised, I'm here in the Sunshine State. It is visiting my parents. I'm at their retirement community. Um, it is sunny, but as you could probably tell, it's not warm. I was hoping to be in a t-shirt today. I'm not. It's 40, like 42 degrees or something this morning. It is supposed to be in the 80s next week, so t-shirt next week. Um, it's just so cute being here because everyone's like, bundle up, stay warm, Bob, Um, and anyway, it's like it's the tundra. Anyway, here we are. I'm here to do a weekly reads and update you on what I've been reading. Um, So I did obviously the plane ride. Um, I'm able to get through a lot. So, first thing, audiobook that I listened to was History of Burning by Janika Oza. This is three generations of an Indian family. And they go from India to Uganda. And then it's sort of what happens to the family as Idi Amin comes to power and the British leave, and Idi Amin expels all of the Indians from Uganda. And the family ends up um, in Canada. This is, it's interesting if you don't know the history of Uganda. I think the author does a great job of inserting that history, but not in a way that's intrusive. Um, there's sort of family secrets, and of course, the family secrets come out, right? So the past is never really the past, and it's how people's choices impact later generations of the family. There's also obviously quite a bit about racism and the sort of the impacts of colonialism and how that shapes the future. This was great. I listened to this a lot as I was knitting and doing all my things, and this was just great to just put on, and you could listen to this for extended periods of time. Okay, he's leaving. It's interesting to see how, as the secrets come out, of course, people are initially upset, shocked, whatever. But then, as their lives go on and they have to make difficult choices, they become a little bit more understanding and a little bit more sympathetic, and understanding. And so, in that sense, I found it sort of hopeful. People come back together. It was interesting to read this and then have it immediately be followed by The Strangers by Katerena Vermette. This I was reading for the Past and Future Readathon. This was my choice for Read a Favorite Author. So this is also sort of three generations of a family. So grandmother, mother, daughter. And it's told in over 5 years, and each of these characters get a chapter in each of those years. Um, this is a Katerena Vermette is a Métis writer in Canada, and so this is three generations of a Métis family, um, as told through the lives of these women. This I loved this book. I loved Katerena Vermette's debut, The Break. This is um, a story centered on the Stranger family, um, and Phoenix, the daughter, one of the daughters, is she was a minor character in The Break, so this is sort of tangential. Um, anyway, this is about a lot about how stories in the present day, or this, what happens to the daughters, has echoes to their mother, who has echoes to the grandmother. So not necessarily family secrets, but again, it's how those choices and decisions impact later generations, but also how intergenerational trauma, and again, how these stories sort of repeat. um, I loved it, and also just very similar to A History of Burning, where the the family, despite forces pulling them apart, still people gravitate towards one another. Um, just again, it was just interesting to read these two books back to back, in how much they echoed one another and were in conversation with one another, even though, of course, the stories are so different. Um, there's a lot with poverty, and how how being poor, it's really hard to get out of that cycle of poverty, and privilege. um, yeah, just the end, I think, of this book was hopeful but ambiguous. I interpreted it as hopeful. It gives you just enough to think that, the current generation is going to turn itself around and break these cycles. So again, I found it hopeful. But Katerena Vermette, um, she's a great writer, and there's such emotional intensity to her writing. I love it, and I loved The Break, and this book I loved as well, even though there are parts that are brutal. Um, the very opening is Phoenix, one of the daughters, giving birth while she's incarcerated, um, and you know that scene is brutal, right? And so, you know, that just right there sort of sets you up for how that book is going to go. It was great. um, so then I read a novella, Ashes and Earth by Atiq Rahini, and I could not find the translator's name on Goodreads or through the library app. So I'm sure, well, I like to believe that it was told at the beginning of the book and I just missed it. But anyway, apologies. This is a novella with an incredibly tight focus. So you don't sort of get the larger political context here, which I think was okay. So this is a story in Afghanistan in the 80s. So I think it's in the 80s, maybe the 70s, but anyway, where the Russians bomb this man's village. His entire family is killed, except for his grandson, who is deafened by the explosion. And he and his grandson are traveling to find his son, who's working in a mine for the Russians, to tell him that his wife and his mother are dead. This is told in the second person, which I think, again, it's a very tight focus. So it's really the grandfather and his thoughts. And I think that second person voice is again pulling the reader into that incredibly tight focus of the story. It does give you a sense of the immediacy of the events, but I know a lot of people have trouble with second person narratives, and I'm not sure that this one completely worked for me either. But you get a sense of sort of the trauma of this event. He has nightmares. He, has sort of hallucinations during the day of events. So he's sort of constantly reliving the horror of the bombing. He's constantly sort of fumbling. He's indecisive. So again, you just get the sense of how much he's struggling with his own sorrow. He's constantly wrestling with, do I tell my son? Because he's fearful that his son will try and seek vengeance. But then he also feels like it's dishonorable if he doesn't tell his son. So he's constantly wrestling with sort of that decision. You also get a sense of his burden of, again, having to share with his son the death of his entire family. But he's also carrying around, so it's his son who doesn't know. He's with his grandson, who's very small, who doesn't understand what happened, and is very confused. He doesn't understand that he's now deaf. He keeps like, well, how come nobody has sound coming out of their mouths? So he doesn't understand what's going on. It's a lot of just, again, that intensity of his struggling with the immediate aftermath of this event. I liked it. Can't say I loved it or that I would recommend it, which I feel bad saying, because this is an author who is a very well-regarded Afghani author, and I feel like this was a miss for me, and I just never really connected to our main character, and I'm not quite sure why. If it was the second person, I don't know what it is, but somehow this book did not quite work for me. Then I went on, I wanted something short, and I went ahead and listened to True Grit, which is narrated by Donna Tartt. I'll get to that in a minute. I absolutely loved True Grit. This is really the monologue of Maddie Ross. telling her story. She's 14 years old, and she partners up with Rooster Cogburn, and who's a federal agent, and LaBeef, who is a Texas Ranger, to go ahead and find, oh my God, I forgot his name. Anyway, the guy who is responsible for murdering her father. So she is on a mission to bring him to justice. And so she hires this federal agent to help her. And there is a Texas Ranger who's also on the trail of this guy. So the three of them sort of band together. And Maddie is sort of telling the story. The story takes place in the 1870s. So it's sort of shortly after the Civil War. And she's described as straight as a string. No, I forget what phrase is used to describe her. But anyway, she's bold, she's sassy, she's honorable, she's incredibly bright. She has this persistence. She's absolutely charming, delightful. She makes this book for sure. There's a great deal of humor in this book. Part of it is she comes across as sort of Presbyterian prim. You know, she has little comment, to, her anti-drinking comments to Rooster, for example, or so on the one hand, she's sort of looking down her nose at some of these characters, but then she has also this incredibly dry, deadpan style of describing sort of the shootings and the stabbings that go on in this book. She's delightful and totally makes this book. I can't say I'm a super huge, I've read 2 Westerns in my life, this and Lonesome Dove. I love them both. This, to me, I found a lot more charming and fun, and it's very short. So I loved it. Loved it. Donna Tartt narrating. First of all, I was sort of like, huh? That seems like a weird combo. And Donna Tartt has an essay at the end of this book. And she talks about how she read this book when she was initially 14, and she loves it, and her mother loves it, and her grandmother loves it. So this is sort of like a family, beloved book, and how she has read this book many times and how they would read it aloud to one another. So she makes a comment that this is not her first time reading this book aloud. She does a fantastic job. She talks a lot about Maddie as a character, and also talks about, which I didn't pick up on until she sort of comments about it at the end, but the story, Maddie is telling this story, but at the very end, you realize she's telling this as an older woman in the 1890s, reflecting on this event that happened when she was a kid. And there's also a point where she talks about going to track down Rooster, and he's sort of in a Wild West show. And so you sort of get a sense of that America's moved on, and that era of the frontier West has completely passed. That the character of the West has completely changed, and these sorts of events would never happen again. I loved it. If you can get listen to the audiobook. Donna Tartt does a fantastic job. And I thought her essay was interesting. So definitely True Grit, amazing. What? So I'm currently reading A Furious Sky, and I did not make note of who wrote it, but this is a nonfiction book about hurricanes, the history of hurricanes, which I thought would be a, you know, an appropriate book for reading here in Florida. And I'm listening to a new release by a Brazilian author. I just started it and I can't remember the title, so I'm gonna say no more about it. And you'll have to wait till next week when I'm done. And we'll see if I can get my mom to participate and share what she's reading. So, and again, next week, I will have the t-shirt, guaranteed. All right. Hey, thanks so much for joining me, and hope everybody's having a great week, and I'll catch you next week. See ya.